In Epiphany, we're discovering Jesus, and we are witnesses to and custodians of the greatest mystery and beneficiaries of the most beautiful love story in cosmic history, God's love story about his relationship with us. So, we've been using Ron DiCiani's painting called Simeon's Moment, and it's just, to me, one of the most lovely of paintings. And I'm going to use it again a little bit later in the sermon. But look at the expression on Simeon's face, and look at the little tousled head and the light shining from baby Jesus. It's just, to me, one of the most beautiful pictures. But as I've been doing every week, I relabeled the painting. And today I want to talk about Simeon's advice. He's got some great advice for us. Some of it comes out of the Old Testament, that story about Joseph and his family, and others comes from the New Testament and Psalms, and then, of course, a wonderful story about Jesus. And, here's Simeon's advice as he gets close to the end of his life. He's basically saying, I've been faithful every day, and finally, Lord, you kept your promise. There were some good days, there were some bad days, but you were there in every single one of them. And I want you to think about that. There are good days and bad days, but God is there in every single one of them. So this morning, for a few minutes, seeing Jesus in life's difficult days. You ready for this? Or have you all figured this all out and we'll just rip through the slides really fast and be done? Okay, well, let's see what happens. In today's texts, they cause us to revisit distressing times in our lives when we wonder about and question God's care for us. So I want to talk to you about 4 ways to heal and hope if you've had some of those distressing times and you're still in the middle of them and kind of climbing through them. I want to talk to you about sovereign certainty. Wow, that's a big word. Theological words for 200, Alex. And then life-building trust, what that means through the scriptures, what it means to be an image bearer. And then finally, epiphany life. In other words, the lights go on. You see Jesus, even in those difficult times. And the first passage is from Genesis this morning, chapter 45. Don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. And this is Joseph speaking. For God sent me before you to preserve life, to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He's made me a father to Pharaoh. Now, those are some pretty extraordinary words if you remember the story. Joseph was born a favorite son to his dad. His brothers were envious. So they decided on one bright sunny day in the Middle East to dig a pit, throw him in it, and that would be the end of him. They actually ended up selling him. He went to Egypt, was caught in a very difficult situation, which he not only survived, but thrived. And Pharaoh, because of his amazing gifts of organization, made him the head of his household. Now that's an American story, isn't it? It's one of those, I came here with nothing. I persevered through the whole thing. I started 85 businesses and failed at 84, but the 85th, that was it. And now I'm a multimillionaire and I'm one of the people on Shark Tank. Perfect. What a great story. It's an American story told in the Middle East quite a few thousand years ago, by the way. So what's going on here? By the way, you should know that a little later, Joseph's reforms were so put together in North Africa that they endured until the communist regime in Ethiopia just a few years ago. So what God gave him during that time would keep North Africa in food for centuries. Well, anyway, back to the story. So when we talk about the sovereignty of God, sometimes we put it this way, that God rules over everything. Now, you've seen the t-shirts in all the shops that say old men rule. Well, God's more ancient than any of us old men. He really does rule. So how does that happen? Well, in verse 5, you see that distress comes to every life. And this Hebrew word means the gut-wrenching angst that's produced by events that we neither anticipate nor want. Ever had a few of those in your life? Maybe this past week? I'm seeing Donna and Carol nodding. That's because for months, their mechanic couldn't get parts for a car. And it was distressing. They couldn't come to church because they didn't have a way to get here. And they live out in Escondido. And I went out to visit them and I said, "You want me to help you out? I can go talk to those guys." And they said, "No, they're family friends." That was a wise choice. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, the transmission came in and they're here. Thank God. But that was distressing. I distress every time I have to take my car in. It almost inevitably means $600 to $700 to $800 to $900. You just never get out. But this is more than that. This is life-threatening distress. This is heartbreaking distress. And God rules even in the middle of that. God's purposes may be hidden to us, but not to him. Why? Because being omnipresent and omniscient and omnipotent, he has already actually lived in the days ahead of us. He actually knows what I'm going to say 5 minutes from now. I kind of know what I'm going to say, but I may not know every word. He knows it all because he's already been there. Ever stop to think about that? And thought about the implications of it? If God's already been in those moments, I guess I really can trust him. If you walked out of here this morning with an epiphany or an aha at that moment, you might have gained just enough truth to make your life incredible. You can trust God. God's perspective is both earthly and eternal. Mine is what's going to happen for the rest of the day. What do I have on my schedule for the week? What's going to happen this month? When's my next vacation? Who am I going to meet that's going to change my life? Who am I going to meet that's going to make my life more miserable? Who? But God's perspective is both earthly and eternal. That's why death shouldn't be scary. Because while there's a transition when we die, we, because we know God, can gain that earthly and eternal perspective. Our life is longer than what we think about in terms of years here on earth. So that contributes to what I would call sovereignty certainty. You know that he's in charge. You know that his purposes are clear to him. You know that he's going to take you through the most difficult circumstance, even death. You know he rules. And what Joseph was saying to his brothers when he finally revealed who he was to them, because remember, just before this passage, they had no idea that he was alive. And did you see what happened? When he said, "I'm Joseph, your brother," it says they were dismayed. Why would they have been dismayed? Well, first of all, they would have been scared out of their minds. What do you mean? You, an Egyptian, are our brother. And secondly, their memories would have come back. We sold you. You have the power of life and death over us. But clearly Joseph's heart is warm with the sovereignty of God. You didn't send me here. God did. And do you know why? I endured all of this so that I could preserve you. And by the way, if Israel gets preserved, Jesus comes. And if Israel doesn't get preserved, we wouldn't be meeting here this morning. Your life wouldn't be what it is. Think about that. Sovereign certainty. Now, how do you get that? Well, I think the psalm has some keys for us. Foundational, life-building trust. I preached my very first sermon on Psalm 37. And I've never preached the same sermon again. But I'm going to give you Psalm 37 again, but with about 48 more years' wisdom. How's that? Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. If you're a teacher and you see that word trust, you may go back to a man named Eric Erickson who talked about teenagers and where they get the confidence to go forward in life. Erickson said, trust is the key. He said, it starts when babies are at their mother's breasts. The smile from a mother while she's feeding her child is the beginning of trust. The hugs from a dad as a child is growing up is the affirmation that yields trust. The fact that for babies, when you open the cabinet door in the kitchen and there are dishes there, and you pull out a dish and you close the door, well, we don't actually know this. But what the theorists like Erickson say is, it appears, it disappears. It appears, it disappears. But after a while, you gain trust that behind that door is the food dish. And when the door closes, it doesn't disappear and go away forever. It's going to come back. And that's the way it is with our lives. Because life gets difficult and we don't maybe see God, doesn't mean he's not there. Just have to open the door. And when we keep opening the door, we keep finding God's there. It may look like it's behind the scenes, but God's there. Trust in the Lord. That helps you do good. Because God is doing good, you replicate what he's doing through your life for others. Dwell in the land. Don't be all frazzled and say, oh, I think this is going to come to an end. I'll never set down roots. In fact, on one occasion in Jeremiah, God said to the people of Israel, you're going to be taken captives. First thing I want you to do is establish yourself in the land, plant gardens, do marriages. Because if you cause the place to which you're called to prosper, so will you. That was God's plan, even for exile. Befriend faithfulness. In other words, be as faithful, as consistent as is God. Just do what God does. But there's even more to that. I'm calling them Lord stones. What God gives us and that helps us build our trust. And the first is fret not. Oh, I hate what those politicians are doing. I hate what's being said on Facebook. Fret not. Did you hear what happened to my voice when I was fretting? It changed tone. This is the warm, affectionate, loving Bill. This is the fretful, angry, upset Bill. And it's all based on that word fret. What's a fret? Well, if you're a musician, it's a little something that, as you use the frets, it changes the length of a string and changes the tune. So, what is the psalmist saying, who, by the way, is a musician? He's saying, If you fret, your whole tune changes. Your life changes. You become frantic. But if you trust, you relax. Now, in some ways, fretting can be really good. The tones that were being played on the piano were being played on strings of different lengths, and that's how we get harmonies and the music itself. But when you're doing this, when you're changing the tune in your life, it's not honoring to God. And you're likely going to do something that's not going to be honoring to yourself as well. And besides, you're going to live in this anxiety moment after moment. The first stone, don't fret. Why? Because sovereignty is certain. You don't have to worry because God's not, and you're his. Be not envious. Oh, I wish I had what that guy had. If I could only win the lottery, I know I'd be happy. If I only had that couch or that chair, if I could only drive that car, I know I'd be happy. If I only had those friends, I'd have so much more influence. If I. You know why you're here this morning? Because you blew that all out the window. Because you're certain that God doesn't want you to live there. If I. We're going to talk about contentment in just a second. Don't be envious. Trust in. In other words, see God's faithfulness and believe that he's going to continue to be that way day after day. Delight in. Wow, God! This is a new day. And you let me live in it. Check the obituaries. Yep, you let me live in it. Commit your way to. That's that morning prayer that you pray. Dear Lord, I'm your son or daughter. This is your day. Use me any way you wish. Now I'm committed to it. Be still before the Lord. Have you ever had the experience where a child has come to you for yet the 59th time? Hey, can I borrow the keys? 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 And you, inside, you just desperately wanted to say, shut up. Yes, here are the keys. Can you imagine God feeling that way? Hey, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? Hey, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? Hey, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? You can imagine God saying it in a British voice because it always sounds better in a British voice. Be still. Know that I am God. Oh, yeah. Isn't that right? It's always better in a British voice. Norman knows. Refrain from anger. Don't do it. You know how you refrain from anger? At the start of the day, say, Lord, I'm not going to be angry today. Nothing is going to upset me. And God says, got your back. Be meek. This word means teachable. Laugh with. Isn't it great that we have scripture verses about laughing with God? You've heard the cliche, man makes plans, God laughs. Because we don't always know what's going to happen, do we? Why don't you learn to laugh with God? I'm not saying you need to laugh about what's going on the Ukrainian border. I'm not saying you have to laugh at a gas attack in Syria. I'm not saying you have to laugh at the martyrdom of Christians in North Africa. But I am saying that there are some circumstances that we fret about, that we're concerned about, that they actually make God laugh because he already knows what the outcome is. And if we just laugh with him, he's so much healthier. Be righteously content. righteously content. God, you gave me what I have. Thank you. Because what I have is probably just what I need. And Lord, if I have needs, I'll bring them to you, and I'll believe that you're going to answer prayer just exactly as I need it. Even if it means difficult times. So those are the Lord's stones. Those are the foundation stones of a life that really does believe in sovereign certainty. Now, we have this wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that reminds us that we're image bearers. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, Adam, we also shall bear the image of the man of heaven. Think about it. You went from dusty to heavenly. From dusty to heavenly. The other morning, I was talking to my daughter on Zoom, and I made a big mistake. I did this. And you know what happened? Suddenly, because I was in a ray of light, all this dust came up. And I looked at the screen, and I saw the dust, and I thought, what did I just do? And I heard laughter on the other end, and I saw laughter on the other end, and she said, well, you should move around a little bit more. And I thought, you're right about that, but I was thinking something else. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I'm closer to death now than I was even just a few minutes ago, which is true. But have you ever had one of those moments? It's one of those moments where you just kind of, whoa, that's something. But someday you're going to be able to go, no dust, because you'll be in heaven. And there's immortality there. So you start out with Adam, or what he called natural, and you move to spiritual, which is resurrection spirituality. Well, maybe I better get to that slide. So what does it mean to be in the image of God? Well, first of all, it means that there's a glory that shines in you. Do you see all the sentences about glory, different kinds of glory? And as Paul speaks, he's speaking like a philosopher and a theologian, not a scientist. But he's talking about all the different glories that there are. But the one glory that's really important is the glory of God and the fact that it shines through us. God made us that way. How? Well, when God breathed into Adam, he became a living being or a living soul. That's how we were created. The very breath of God gave us life. And that creation is so important to God that even though death may come, resurrection is still in the future. In other words, the perishable is made imperishable. I'm hoping I come back at around 30 years of age. That seemed to be a really good time. That seemed to be before the aches and pains. That seemed to be before the doctor's visits that you were nervous about. And then Adam's dust is Jesus' heaven. Look at the investment that God's made in us from the beginning of creation to eternity. Look how special human beings are. As much as we love our dogs and cats, it's not the same. As much as we love the whales that are getting close to extinction and the ones who are not, it's not the same. This is special. The image of God. And the fact that we can communicate with him through the glory and the souls and the resurrection and the from dust to heaven is one of those rare qualities in the cosmos. Finally, live an epiphany life, a whoa life, shining Jesus. As you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Just be like Jesus. Now, you recognize that as the golden rule. You've probably heard it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it's gotten changed in the world around us. Do unto others before they do unto you. Do unto others, well, you know the variations. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Let me just show you something. So we can live life like this. Now, that looks different than the painting earlier, right? What's wrong with it? No color. Look what happens when you add color. You know that guy? President's Day. How about that guy? Somebody took the time with a computer to figure out what Lincoln would have looked like if we had a color portrait of him. He kind of looks more real, doesn't he? How about this guy? I love this picture of Einstein. Doesn't this look more real? This is kind of a sad one. A young child dressed in Holocaust dress. It looks a little distant to us, doesn't it, when it's in black and white? But what about that? Now he's real. He's not a photograph. He's a kid. There were others I could have chosen for this particular slide. And I just felt like one was enough. 6 million. George Washington Carver, a great scientist in the early 1900s. But what if you saw him on 16 millimeter film in color? And he was moving. And he was walking around in 1937. What if you saw him as more than just a scientist? What if he took you to his house and sat down at his table and put on his glasses? And you could sit at the table with him. Don't worry, it's a silent film. And what if you found out that George Washington Carver was not just the guy who took biblical understanding of crop rotation and made it apply to the North American scene, but you found out that he also loved to knit and crochet. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be an epiphany? He comes more to life. And the reason I chose George Washington Carver is I studied him in school. He was, to some degree, a botanist like my grandfather, who taught at University of Wisconsin. They were contemporaries. But it's been Black History Month. What if he greeted you at the door, just like that? And this film, I can't show the whole thing, is 20 minutes long, but it shows him in the garden with his plants, with students, with family. Shows the real scientist, but man, look at him patting the little kid on the head. He's real. It seems like this that made the civil rights movement work. Suddenly, they weren't just black and white pictures on the newspaper. These are real people. Like quite real people. Changes your perspective, doesn't it? It's an epiphany. If you're a film buff, you love this. You know where we are, don't you? We're in Kansas. We need more volume. By the way, I kind of fell in love with her when I was 6, even though the movie she was already an adult by that time. And when that happened, people in the theaters went, oh, because this is when movies went from sepia brown tones to Technicolor. I'm just going to let you enjoy this moment. Sing along if you want to. So Kalani, this is before CGI, computer graphic imaging. Wow. I don't know if you were one of the people in the theater. I think actually Jean said that this movie is older than she is, so chances are none of us were there. But can you imagine what that must have been like? But that's when an epiphany is, isn't it? I get it. So how do we understand Jesus' golden life? Well, there are 18 things here. I'm going to rip through them really fast. You'll do a checklist in your own mind. Do you love your enemies? Do you do good to those who hate you? Do you bless those who curse you? Do you pray for those who abuse you? Or let the striker hit you twice? Do you offer the coat stealer your underwear? That's what that means, by the way, the passage we read. Do you give to every beggar? Let thieves have your stuff? Do for others what you want them to do for you? Love everyone? Do good to all? Lend expecting nothing in return? Are you kind to the ungrateful and evil? Are you merciful? Do you put yourself in other situations before you judge them? Are you judgmental? Condemning? Or are you forgiving? You give abundantly. This is what somebody said to me the first time I preached on the passage. You've got to be kidding. How will I live? How can anyone possibly live like that? No wonder nobody listens to you guys. This is just anti-cultural. Remember that American ending a little bit earlier? This is not an American ending, doing all those things. It's push, get ahead, maximize profit. Buyer beware. Jesus is not saying seek out enemies, haters, thieves, rip-off artists, swindlers, ingrates, all beggars, condemning, violent, judgmental, cursing, and evil people, so that you can be abused, get your Suffer for Jesus badge, and be superior to all. He's not saying that. He is saying something different. When you run across people like this in life, and you will, be like me. Add color, dimension, realness to your life and the world around you. Let Jesus' light shine and Epiphany life be evident to all. So today's Epiphany is, okay, if that's what it means to live like Jesus, golden rule, Epiphany life, I'll do it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to even pray about it. I'm not going to ask you to pray about doing what Jesus wants you to do. Just do it. Just do it. You'll save all that time arguing with Jesus. You'll have lots more time to do much nicer things. Just do it.